This is Joe with CloudFirst Labs, here with part 2 of use MuleSoft RPA to fill out a web form. In this case, we are going to trigger this from Salesforce, and we're going to use Salesforce data to populate that web form. If you remember, in part 1, we built the RPA process that is showing on the screen currently that simply fills out a web form using activity parameters. As prerequisites for this, what you'll need, in addition to that RPA process being set up, of course, you need an RPA process to run to be able to use it from Salesforce. You're also going to need Salesforce and MuleSoft RPA licenses. You're going to need Anypoint Platform credentials. You're going to need Salesforce credentials. You are going to need that RPA process that we built, like the one that I showed a video of briefly. That needs to be in production phase, and there needs to be an invocable run configuration for that. If you have any questions about how to set that up, see some of our previous videos on creating MuleSoft RPA processes invocable from Postman. We need the URL for that invocable RPA process, and we also need the client ID and client secret for a connected app that has RPA invocable process scope. So basically a set of client credentials that has access to call to invoke an RPA process. With those prerequisites noted, let's go, let's do it. Let's set this up. Here you'll see in RPA Manager, I do have that RPA process in the production phase, as we see here. And we can see that there is an invocable configuration set up. So this can be called from Salesforce. So what we're going to do next is we're going to log into Salesforce, which is where we're going to trigger this RPA process from. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I've got my multi-factor authentication. Okay, we took care of that. We're logged in. Now let's go to Setup. We're going to start out here on the Setup tab, and we are going to set up MuleSoft Services. So if I search MuleSoft, come here to Services. Now I'm going to log in to Anypoint Platform. And once again, MFA is set up, and we will approve that and move forward. Okay, so now we're logged in. Now what we want to do is we will eventually import a service, but before we do that, we want to set up the credentials for this. So we are going to come over here and set up an external credential. So if I search for named credentials, I'm going to pull this up, and here from the named credentials tab, I'm going to go to external credentials and do new. And I'm going to create a new external credential. I'm going to say RPA web form external credential. I'm going to use the same name here. And in this case, we're going to use OAuth 2.0 because that is what that connected app uses that we authenticate to our RPA API with. So that's what we're going to do here. So OAuth 2.0, and then we're going to do, instead of a browser flow, we're going to do client credentials with client secret flow. And for scope, we can leave that blank. For identity provider URL, it's going to be anypoint.mulesoft.com accounts API v2 OAuth 2 token, and pass client credentials and request body. I'm going to check that and hit save. With that saved, we're going to scroll down here within this external credential. We're going to come to principles and do a new principle. I'm going to give it a name, RPA web form principle, and the client ID and client secret are from your connected app that you set up. These are the credentials you're going to use. So I'm going to paste mine in here and hit save. With that, we created the credential, and now what we need to do is create a named credential for that, because we now have an external credential, but now within security named credentials, let's come into the named credentials tab and do new. And I'm going to name this RPA web form named credential. I'm gonna use that here. For the URL, I'm going to use the base URL for the RPA APIs. So that's going to be https CloudFirst labs.rpa.mulesoft.com. Of course, this is going to be different from organization to organization, but you want the base RPA URL here. And we want enable for callouts to be true. And then we want to select the external credential that we just set up, which is RPA web form external credential. And with that, I'm also going to allow formulas in the HTTP body for HTTP callouts. That'll allow us to use formulas when we set this up from a Salesforce flow. Anyway, I'm going to hit save. So now we have an external credential with a principal, and now we are referencing that external credential from the named credential. With the credentials established, we now need to set up a permission set. So let's come up here and search permission, open up permission sets, and click new. In new permission sets, I'm going to call this RPA API access. It's going to auto-generate the API name, and I'm going to hit save. And once we do that, we're going to come down here to the apps that were generated for this permission set. And we are going to look for, let's see, external credential principal access. So we want to give this permission set access to that external credential principal that we just set up. So clicked here, and now we're going to do edit, and we are going to give it access to the RPA web form external credential. Click save. Okay, so now we have access there, and now we're going to come up here to manage assignments. We need to assign this to appropriate users. I'm going to add an assignment. I'm going to assign it to myself because I've got system administrator access in this dev environment. So you want to give it to someone with good access if you want this to be able to be triggered by an automated process. So I assign myself, and I'm not going to add an expiration date. Okay, and so now we've got that permission set up, and we'll see it here. RPA API access is set up. So now that we have these things in place, let's go back to MuleSoft services. And I mentioned earlier we would come back and import, and looks like I'm got logged out from any point here, so I will re-log in. And now that I am logged in, import. And hey, right on top, this is the RPA API that we want for fill out web form. So I'm going to select that and click next. And for the name, I'm going to use that name that it suggested in there. Fill out web form version 1.0.0, fill out web form 100. With the named credential, we want to use the one we just created, RPA web form named credential, and do save and next. And here we want two operations. We want the start process v2. This is going to be what we call to kick off an RPA process, and we also want get processes execution status be to. This is what's going to let us, after we've kicked it off, check to see what the status is and get the results, basically, of the execution of the given RPA process instance. So we're going to select those two and click Finish. All right, now we have an imported MuleSoft service that is going to be set up as an external service that can be used from a Salesforce flow. So now that we have that set up, all right, let's do it. Let's set up the Salesforce flow. Come up here, Process Automation, Flows. Let's create a new flow. In this case, we're going to do a flow based on when a quote in Salesforce gets updated to move into presented status. So we are going to use a record triggered flow, and we will do this create. So on an object of quote, when a record, we don't want it on record is created, we want it when a record is updated. And we want to set some entry conditions here. So let's go ahead and say when all conditions are met and when the field status is equal to presented. And let's do it only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements. So we don't want to run this every time any quote gets updated and it's in presented status. We only want it when a record is updated and the status is newly changed to be presented. So that's what we set up there, and optimize the flow for actions and related records. We do want to check this box down here at the bottom. This include a run asynchronously path to access an external system. It won't allow for an external call out to this RPA API if you don't have this run asynchronously path. So we don't want to run these steps from a run immediately path. It would throw error messages eventually. We want to run these steps from a run asynchronously path, which is still going to run like as soon as things are updated. Just Salesforce handles it slightly differently. It's not running synchronously because of that call out. So we'll go ahead and save this. And I'm going to name this RPA web form flow. It gives it a flow API name. Okay, so now we have the base of our record triggered flow. We've got a run asynchronously path here. And from this path, what we are going to do is we are going to create a new action to call that RPA process. So, when we do call that RPA process, we're going to want to pass in a message body, an HTTP body to the API URL to provide some data from Salesforce to the RPA API process. So what I'm going to do over here is add a new resource of type variable, and I'm going to name this RPA input body. And we'll see what this is in a minute, but for data type, it's going to be an Apex defined data type. And the class is going to be, if I search fill out, this is going to find some Apex classes that are generated based off of that external service that we set up. So if you remember earlier, we named our service fill out web form 100. Well, here, that's what we're looking for. And we want to set this up for fill out form 100 underscore process execution with execution ID. So that's what this class is. And, so now we have a variable that will hold an object of that type. Now we've got to do an assign step for that variable. So let's do that. Let's do an assignment element. And here in this assignment element, I'm going to call it set RPA input. And we're going to have a bunch of variables here. So if we do RPA input body, input arguments, or actually no, instead of input arguments, RPA input body and execution ID. All right, this is going to be important later. We are going to name this, we're going to set this RPA execution ID, this RPA process instance ID. That's what this execution ID is. We're going to set it equal to our record. So the quote that got updated, we're going to set it equal to the quote number from our record. So that will become relevant later. But suffice it to say, it's going to give this a unique ID that when we want to check the status of this RPA process instance later, we know we can get it by looking up, by using the quote number. All right, so that's one field in this RPA input body, but we can add a bunch of assignments here. So we're going to set up the rest of this RPA input body as well. And so what this is going to do, you see this Apex defined class, it read it from the API specification that we've got all of these activity parameters that can be set up within our RPA API. So let's set these up. We're going to do input name equals record opportunity account name. So we just mapped our input name to the account name tied to this record. And it's tied there from the quote to the opportunity to the opportunities account name. We're going to do similar things here as we go down for some of these other fields. So RPA input body, input arguments. Next, we're going to do input address equals. In this one, I have a big long thing I did a copy and paste for because I'm going to do basically a few fields pumped into one field. So let me show it on the screen here. What I just pasted in there. What I just pasted in there is this right here. So it got the billing street, billing city, billing state, and postal code. And you'll see there's a comma there just to format this string successfully. So that's what I pasted in there. So it's just using multiple Salesforce fields to go into one input field. And then as we go down here, we are next going to do the input email. And for this, we're going to do record opportunity account. And then we're going to get the account owner's email. That's what we're going to fill in this web form with. These are just examples. You can do this with any kind of data that you want, that you've got available in Salesforce. Likewise, let's do the phone number. Input phone number equals record opportunity account phone, and one more is RPA input body input arguments, and we're going to have input comments. And for this, we're just going to use the records description field. It's just a good text field. So we're going to pass that in. Those will be the comments in the executed RPA process instance. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now that we have that set up, okay, what is that useful for? Well, now we've got this RPA input body element configured with actual values that we care about. and we click down here. We're going to add an element, and we're going to add an action element. Click, and now let's find the fill out web form. Hey, there's start process V2. So we're going to call this RPA start process, and we're going to include a body, and for this body, we're going to pass in RPA input body. There we go. So now, all those variables that we just initialized in that assignment step, they're going to get used, they're going to get passed in a call to this external service, which will trigger our MuleSoft RPA process to run with those values. So now I'm going to hit done, and that's all we need to do for this run asynchronously flow. We're going to add one more path later, but this handles the run asynchronously path. With that in place, let's go ahead and add our other path. So we can start the process here, but let's say we want to update our Salesforce record 2 based on the results of this RPA process. Let's add a new path. So we come here to schedule paths, we edit, we add a path. What I'm going to do is set up a 2 minutes later path. This will allow us to run this 2 minutes after the quote was updated. So 2 minutes after. So that'll give that RPA process 2 minutes to run. And what we are going to do in this path is basically check the RPA process instance, get its status, which will also get the activity parameter values. So we can get any output activity parameters from that status check. And we can then update something in Salesforce based on the data that was returned by the RPA process. So now that we have this in place, our first step is going to be to add a new action. And we are going to, once again, look out for fill out web form 100. This time we want get processes execution status, V2. So I'm going to call this RPA get status, RPA get status. Okay, and for execution ID, we talked about this earlier. This is going to be tied to our records quote number. That's why we set that earlier. So now we're going to do a lookup against that RPA API service, and we're going to look this execution ID up based on our quote number. Based on that, we are going to update our quote with that data. We're going to update the customer notes section of our quote with the output from that RPA process. So let's come here and add an element, and we're going to say update triggering record. And we are going to call this update quote with RPA output. And we're going to use the quote record that triggered the flow. We're going to always update the record. And we've got a customer notes field here, and we are going to use outputs from RPA get status. And then from the 200 response, the result, one of the output arguments, we're going to get the output form response and stick it in our customer notes field. So we're going to click save here. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and activate it, and then we are going to run this so we can see it in action, see that it does successfully call the RPA, and also that we update our update the quote accordingly with the response. Note that there are options to run this and debug it kind of right here, but since they're in the two different paths, it makes just as much sense to activate it and run it on a real case. So let's go into Salesforce and move a quote into presented status to see this in action. Most of this is going to take place behind the scenes, but I will show a couple Postman calls as it goes, just so we can see the progress. And I'll probably kind of fast forward a lot. But you see here, we've got a test account open. Let's look at its details. You can see we've got a phone number plugged in, a shipping address, a billing address. These are some of an account name, Joe RPA testing account. These are some of the values that are getting passed as we configured earlier into the RPA process. So from this, let's create a quote. And let's see, I'm going to do Joe RPA test quote A, B, C, D, E, F, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to give it a random date, and we won't worry about the rest of those details. The one other thing I am going to set is a description, because this will get passed into the comments in the RPA process. So if I pass in, this is my description, we'll click save, and that's not going to trigger anything yet. What triggers it is moving something into presented status. So if you recall, we are setting this up with the execution ID equal to the quote number. So the quote number is 039 in this case. So if I pull up Postman over here and look for 39, this execution does not exist. Okay, let's set this equal to presented now. All right, this should now be kicking off a flow, under the covers that calls this RPA process. Let's see what we got. Hey, all right, something happened. It's in status not started. So we'll come back and check on this shortly. Okay, now it's in running status. Still in running status. Running status. And it has completed. So this is what Salesforce is going to get back when it tries to check on the status in that 2 minutes later flow. It hasn't been 2 minutes yet, so I bet if we come down here and we're looking at the customer notes section, if we view this here, it's probably not going to be updated. But what we expect to see, because the output form response, we see the RPA process got this response back. Your response has been recorded. That's ultimately what we want updated here within Salesforce. So we will refresh. And we try refreshing one more time. Hey, there it is. Your response has been recorded. That demonstrates the ability of Salesforce to integrate with MuleSoft RPA and not only pass in information from Salesforce to MuleSoft RPA, but to get back data from that RPA process back into Salesforce. So it integrates really seamlessly. A lot of the configuration that was done is kind of a one-time configuration. You need to do it the first time you configure Salesforce to connect to MuleSoft RPA, but then a lot of those steps are done for you for the next, however many RPA processes that you integrate with. So like usual, MuleSoft makes things really straightforward for integration. Same thing with Salesforce. So for more tips on both Salesforce and MuleSoft RPA, keep checking back with CloudFirst Labs. We are here to help. Thank you very much.